For centuries, some European courts treated animals as if they could answer the law. It sounds like folklore, but the surviving records suggest something stranger. In parts of medieval and early modern Europe, animals were sometimes brought into formal legal proceedings. Pigs, horses, dogs, bulls, and even swarms of insects could become the subject of court action. This was not because people believed a pig understood courtroom procedure in the modern sense. The legal world of the Middle Ages was built around public order responsibility, sin property, and visible punishment. When something terrible or disruptive happened, a court could become the place where the community made sense of it. One of the most often cited examples comes from Falaise in Normandy in 1386. According to records discussed by historians, a sow was tried after causing a child's death. The details vary in later retellings, and some accounts add theatrical elements that should be treated carefully. But the wider practice was real enough to leave traces across Europe. There were also cases involving pests. In some regions, church courts were asked to deal with insects that damaged crops. The animals could be formally summoned, and in a few cases legal representatives were appointed to argue on their behalf. To modern ears, that sounds almost comic. To a farming community facing hunger, it was a serious attempt to place chaos inside a moral and legal frame. The strange detail is that these proceedings copied human justice. There could be accusations, witnesses, sentences, and ritual language. The court was not merely deciding what to do with an animal. It was announcing that disorder had been noticed, named, and answered. Over time, this practice faded. Ideas about law changed. Responsibility became more closely tied to intention, reason, and human agency. Animals became property in the eyes of many legal systems, not defendants. But these trials still matter, because they reveal something powerful. Law has never been only about punishment, it is also about explanation. It tells a community what kind of world it thinks it lives in. And once law could judge a pig, it is easier to understand how the same legal world tried to judge what people wore. In Tudor England, the wrong sleeve could make you a lawbreaker. Clothing was not just decoration, it was a public announcement. It told strangers your rank, your wealth, your occupation, and the place society expected you to occupy. That is why England, like many European societies, created sumptuary laws, rules that tried to control who could wear what. These laws were not invented by the Tudors, but they became especially visible in the world of Henry V and Elizabeth I. Earlier English rules, including legislation in the 14th century, had already tried to limit fabrics, furs, and styles. By social rank under the Tudors, proclamations and statutes continued the same idea. Velvet silk, ermine gold, cloth, silver embroidery, and certain rich colours could be restricted to people of particular status. The exact rules shifted over time, but the message stayed clear. Luxury was not supposed to be available simply because someone could afford it. Why would a government care about sleeves, caps, linings, or gowns? Partly because clothing blurred hierarchy. A prosperous merchant might dress like a gentleman. A servant might copy the style of a noble household. In a world where rank was meant to be visible, fashion could become social confusion. There was also an economic argument. Rulers and lawmakers worried that people spent too much on foreign luxury goods. Fine cloth could drain money out of the kingdom. Or, so the argument went, sumptuary law tried to protect both social order and national wealth. Enforcement was uneven. Local officials could inspect accuse or fine court records, and proclamations show. The concern was real, but daily life was harder to control than paper law. Fashion moved quickly, ambition moved faster. The strangest part is that these laws turned the body into evidence. A coat could be suspicious, a hat could suggest presumption, a lining could hint that someone was reaching above their station. Eventually these rules weakened, trade expanded, consumer culture grew, clothing became less reliable as a fixed language of rank. By the modern age, the idea that the state should reserve velvet for certain people began to look absurd. But the old laws reveal a society terrified of invisible change. Status had to be seen or it might not hold, and status was not the only thing lawmakers tried to measure. The next rule put order into the most ordinary object on the table. For much of English history, the size of your loaf was a matter of law. Bread was not a small detail. It was daily survival in medieval towns. A bad loaf could mean hunger, fraud, or unrest. So English authorities developed one of the most practical strange laws in everyday life, the assize of bread and ale. The assize is usually associated with the 13th century, especially the reign of Henry VIII. Its purpose was simple, but its method feels unfamiliar now. Instead of letting bakers freely decide how much bread a coin should buy, officials tied the weight of bread to the price of grain. If wheat became expensive, the loaf did not necessarily cost more, it became smaller. If wheat became cheaper, the loaf could become larger. The penny loaf was supposed to remain a penny loaf, but its weight could rise or fall according to the market. This mattered because most people did not have the time, tools, or power to test every baker. The law created a public standard. It turned trust into measurement. Ale was also regulated. Local officers, often called ale tasters or ale conners in English records, checked quality and pricing. Their exact duties varied by place and period, and later stories about them can be exaggerated. But the office itself shows how seriously communities treated everyday goods. Enforcement could involve fines, public correction, or other penalties used by local courts. The aim was not just to punish dishonesty, it was to prevent panic. Bread prices were politically sensitive because bread was life. This strange detail is how technical the law could become. It required officials to know grain prices, calculate permitted weights, and inspect bakers. A loaf was not just food, it was a regulated object, part of a fragile social contract between market town and crown. Over the centuries, this older system slowly lost its place. Markets changed, government changed, industrial baking changed. By the 19th century, much of the medieval framework had been swept away or made obsolete by new forms of regulation. But something survived. Modern consumers still expect food to be weighed honestly, labelled clearly, and sold by rules that can be checked. The medieval assize is gone, but the instinct behind it remains. That is the secret of many bizarre laws. They sound ridiculous at first. Then they reveal what people feared most: disorder, deception, hunger, and a world no one could trust.